I am here with Ada Limón, the 24th Poet Laureate of the United States. Thank you so much for sitting down for this conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, let's start with a big question. Storytelling. What does this phrase, this term mean to you?
When I think about storytelling and making stories, I think about the ways we all try to find containers for who we are, for our hearts or for our souls, the way in which we try to relate to the world and make sense of what our messy lives amount to.
When somebody tells a story, when you sit down and you put pen to paper, do you think about the people that will be reading this, or is it purely what's coming out of you in that moment?
You know, when I write poems in particular, I am often thinking about one or two things. Sometimes I know that there's someone on the other end that I want to reach.
Yeah.
And it can be an individual person. I want to write a love poem for my husband. I want to write a thank you poem for my mother. And sometimes it's a larger audience. And I'm thinking, oh, I'm writing for a readership of this, arena.
Yeah.
But many times when I start writing a poem, it's for me. And I'm trying to make sense of what's happening to me in my life at that time.
When you're writing it for you, and then you talk to somebody who's read your work, and that thing that was written for you hit home for them in such a way, and there was a poem that you wrote that it did that for me, does that surprise you that the thing for you resonates with somebody else in that way?
You know, I think I'm lucky enough to have had people tell me that. And it always really deeply moves me. I don't think it surprises me anymore, but what happens to me is that I realize that we've shared something. And we don't even need to say it out loud.
You know, not everybody is going to be the Poet Laureate of the United States. And one thing that you're saying is, and I've seen this in your writing, is you find the stories in everyday life. And this idea of celebrating that small moment.
Yeah.
How can people, do you have advice to people that may not be the Poet Laureate, but how they can storytell or celebrate the moments in their life?
Yeah. You know, I think storytelling can be really powerful, not in just ways to make art, but also in ways to go about your life. I think so many times we feel like a narrative is given to us, where we belong to someone else's ideas of ourselves, and we don't.
What does that entail to be a Poet Laureate? Is this a 9 to 5? What happens when that title is yours?
Yeah. So I served as Poet Laureate for 3 years, and the Poet Laureate of the United States is named by the Librarian of Congress. So I was named by the 14th Librarian of Congress, Dr. Carla Hayden, and you're essentially tasked with bringing poetry into the public realm and talking about poetry and the power of poetry. And so I spent 3 years essentially traveling the world and talking about why poetry matters.
Looking back at that chapter, what's something surprising that you learned when you were given the mission of bringing poetry into the world and traveling the globe to do so?
Yeah. I think the biggest surprise, and it might not surprise you, was that poetry is happening everywhere. Art is happening everywhere. That there is no community that you can go to and someone that's like, oh, we don't make art. We don't talk about poetry. It was remarkable how many people were not only making things, but encouraging students to make poems, or they were writing poems on rocks and putting them around trees, or everyone had projects that I was super excited to hear about. And so the biggest surprise for me was that I thought my job was to go into the world and talk about poetry. But what my job became was being someone who got to receive all these beautiful stories of how poetry already existed there.
Thank you so much for this conversation. This has been a gift. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.